And welcome again to Religions of the Middle East. I'm Professor Borrowdale, and today we're going to finish up Islam and review for the exam. So let's see, just a brief review about the final. You'll have about a week to take it. It'll be open right after class today, and you will have until Thursday, 5 p.m. to take it. Remember, the lab closes early during final exam week. It closes 5 p.m. Thursday. There's likely to be a bit of a crowd there Thursday afternoon. So try to show up before 4 o'clock. And you're allowed a 3x5 note card for notes. You can see this one's written in like really small microprint. What else? Feel free to come by final exam week during office hours. My office hours will be a little different. I'll send those out on the middle announcements, which show up in your email. Let's see, other announcements. I plan on having my grades in on Thursday. I might end up slacking off a little bit and do it on Friday, but any work that you wish to give me late has to be in by Thursday at 5 when the finals due. That's when all grades will be in. I will begin my final grade calculations. I may be even doing them at the airport. So make sure that if you have like a late report or something else that you want to give me or want to talk to me about your grade, that you do so by Thursday afternoon. And let me say by 3 o'clock. Because I plan on leaving for the airport about then. So, let's see, any other announcements? I think that's it. So, the final is only on Islam. It counts for 30% of your grade. And we'll review in the second part of class here today. So I thought I'd start out with a couple of articles I have in Moodle. I fixed the links. Sorry about the broken links earlier, and that didn't get those fixed right away as promised after class. So I did get them fixed though. So they're up there now, and there's a couple of articles here. One is on Islam and terrorism, and this is an article from Robert Spencer. Actually, there are a couple of articles. One is about this biography by Karen Armstrong, and Robert Spencer is kind of making fun of it. He's the head of some Middle Eastern think tank. It has to do with Islam and the Middle East and politics. And he's, I think he's the author of The Truth About Muhammad and another book about the Crusades. And so he's a prolific writer and political journalist. And so he is talking about this review in the Wall Street Journal of this book by Karen Armstrong called Muhammad, and basically portraying Muhammad as sort of a feminist and who was forced into a life of violence by his barbaric culture, and he mends his own clothes, and he treasures women, and he's just like a good guy. And you'll see a lot of these books coming out of academia that kind of whitewash the unsavory aspects of Islam life of Muhammad, which any person can read about in the Hadith, which I don't want you to forget are written by people who are sympathetic to Muhammad. So when you're reading the Hadith and you're reading something like, well, there's a story about, say, Muhammad torturing some guy until he tells you tells where the treasure is, or Muhammad saying, kill all the Jews, or Muhammad marrying his daughter-in-law after ticking off his son-in-law by hanging out at his beautiful daughter-in-law's house all the time while Sonny Boy is away. And his son finally says, well, you like her so much you can have her, and because he thinks that Muhammad's making time with his wife, and Muhammad takes him into his harem and marries her. That's Zainab. Or Muhammad marrying a little girl, a prepubescent girl. So these are all things you can find in the Hadith, which are actually, in historical accuracy, much more accurate than the material we get from the Gospels. You don't see miracles, myth. You don't see a lot of legendary material and so on in the Hadith. It's passed on, sometimes through a few people, but passed on carefully by people sympathetic to Muhammad. So, and then you can also find some of this material in the Quran too. So, for example, Spencer talks about the fact that there's a section on divorce procedures, and it says that they shall apply to those who have not yet menstruated, right? So basically, you can divorce a prepubescent girl who you've already married. Now, I think maybe the counterpoint to that is that just because you marry someone doesn't necessarily mean you've consummated the marriage. Like Muhammad, Muhammad married Isha when she was 5, but he didn't consummate the marriage until she was 9. So he waited a few years. So you might marry a prepubescent girl and wait until she reaches puberty in order to consummate the marriage, which is, what's the word? It's a euphemism for having sex with your bride. Just in case anybody didn't know what it means to consummate a marriage, sometimes these words fall out of the English language. It's sort of, I guess in court there's a question about if you were, I'm not even sure if this is even relevant in court anymore with it so easy to get a divorce. You used to have to prove that, like, if you wanted to get a marriage annulled and with the Catholic Church, you can, like, show that you never consummated the marriage. That would help out your case. And I think to have a marriage sort of invalidated, that might be one of the grounds for it. Anyhow, so this is a section on women, and here's a great passage here from the Quran. A woman is like a field to be used by a man as he willed. Your women are tilth, that's a field to you, to cultivate, and so go to your field as you will. So if you're a farmer and you're going to sow some seeds in the ground, do you ask the field, "Oh, field, may I sow some seeds upon you that they might grow?" No, you throw the seed in the ground, right? The same thing when you're going to your woman. You don't ask permission, you just do it. And so this again is a passage in the Quran which people that faithfully adhere to the Quran, accept and follow, and it leads to certain sexist attitudes in Islamic societies, which are the fundamentalist bent. Now, in more liberal societies or more progressive societies, more secular societies, they'll look at passages like that and they'll say, "Oh, well, that's not for today," or they'll say, they'll sort of try to find some way around it where it doesn't really say what it says, or they'll just ignore that passage and look at the other passages of the Quran about taking care of the widows and the orphans. It's similar to like your liberal Lutherans or Methodists that kind of soft pedal ideas of hell or predestination or faith healing or the genocides in the Old Testament. They kind of ignore that stuff and want to talk about the sweetness and love parts. And so the problem, though, is when you get a fundamentalist Christian society, what do? Well, they try to love their enemies, or they maybe they preach moralism, but to their neighbor and tell people they're going to hell, right? Oh, what do fundamentalist Muslims do? Well, they try to force people to convert. They subjugate women. They fight in the jihad against the infidel. So you get a very different response when a person is a fundamentalist, which means they're truly following their ancient traditions as closely as possible. That's what a fundamentalist is. You get different responses because there's different contents in the religion. And so because of these passages in the Quran about women not having to consent for sex if you're married to a woman, that you treat your woman like a farmer treats his field, then that has effects on the way people view gender roles, the way and the way people view women's roles in society. women's role in society. I guess women has multiple roles. Women's roles in society. So, and there's also a passage here about women's testimony being worth half that of a man. Now here's this passage, I think this came up earlier, about how many wives you get and whether Muhammad was breaking his own rule in the Quran. And here, this passage, this translation says, let's see, marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4, but if you fear you shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one, or a captive. So basically a slave girl. And that will, so the idea is, if you can afford it, you could have 2, 3, or 4 wives. But if you can't afford it, if you can't take care of them, you should only have 1. Or if you can't even take care of one, if you have like a slave girl will have sex with your slave girl, and don't get married until you can support a wife. So I think that's this Surah 4:3. So that's the rule with regard to multiple marriages. I keep on waiting for, at some point, like the polygamy thing to come up in the U.S. I guess it was settled back with the Mormons, but now with those gay marriage, it seems like the next logical step is the polyamorous relationships, the polygamy and polygyny and group marriage, and so it seems like a Muslim who has at least 2 wives, legally married in an Islamic country, migrates to the U.S. and wants to get health care benefits for a second wife to whom he's legally married and has a marriage relationship with, along with his first wife. I keep on waiting for the ACLU to hit up the feds with a lawsuit. So far, it hasn't happened to my knowledge. And then this passage here, and I think I might have discussed that in class a little bit. Here's another translation than the one that I recited by memory. Men are in charge of women because Allah made the one of them to excel over the other, because they spend of their property. Tell me about it. So good women are the obedient. Good women are the obedient, guarding in secret that which Allah hath guarded. And I guess that means they're, womanly charms. As for those whom ye fear rebellion, admonish them, banish them to their beds apart and scourge them. So basically send them to the room and give them a spanking, right? It's the idea of you mete out corporal punishment and banish them to their room, like a child. So it's no accident that women are treated as second-class citizens in Islamic countries, and the religion has a big part of that. And I think any instructor who will tell you that it doesn't, that it has to do with indigenous tribal customs or something like that, is an apologist. They're attempting to whitewash Islam. Why? Let me ask this question. Why do you think, what might motivate a person to ignore these passages, or to say that Islam has a high view of women, and that anybody who says differently is prejudiced against Islam in some way? Any thoughts on that? Or disagreements? You can disagree with the premise if you like. Yeah.
Kind of how Christianity, like the difference between Judaism and Christianity, insert new prophet Jesus, now here to, you do the opposite of eye for an eye. So I'm wondering, within Islam, I'm not sure how the whole prophets work. Has there been any big thing or a big person to try to shift the tide? As far as that was the old before grace or something. Is there anything gracie out there besides the whitewash?
Well, there's this idea that the later passages abrogate the earlier passages. So the idea, this is a tradition in Islamic theology that anytime you get 2 revelations that conflict, you always go with the last thing revealed. So the problem with that is early on, Muhammad was trying peaceful persuasion to convert people. Then when that didn't work, he went to spreading his religion with the sword. So all of the militant passages, the passage about forced conversions, the passages about the stones crying out, "There's a Jew behind me, come kill him." All those are the later passages. And so those are the ones that the theologians say are the most valid, and the early passages are superseded by those. As far as generals with women, I think nothing like that. I mean, there are feminist Muslims and liberal Muslims that disregard these passages or try to interpret them in a way, or they to coin a phrase, they strain in a gnat and swallow a camel. They try to make these passages say something other than what they do say. Or they try to soften them in some way.
What's the motive for that? Wanting to still be a part of Islam, but just not wanting it to interact with their life choices? Where's the motivation for wanting to see your own business into it?
That's a good question. I mean, that's also like on the side of the believer. I was thinking of the side of the unbelievers. You get like people in the West who are like atheists that really have a strong interest in defending Islam. And to me, that it's, and particularly people who are really liberal, they're for gay rights. They generally are down on religion. They are particularly down on Christian fundamentalists, but they love Islam.
I'll be damned.
And to me, it's utterly mysterious, although I have some theories about it. But then you raised another question, like what if you're raised as a Muslim and maybe, and then you're thinking, well, you're, say, a woman in Islam, and you don't really like all the teachings, and maybe you sort of have broken away from them, but there's still like this attraction to the religion of your youth. I see it a lot in like people that are raised in all kinds of traditions, particularly I think with Catholics, though. A lot of Catholics, they get really sort of, I don't know, bored with the long ritualistic mass, and it's sort of forced on them as kids. It's different if you're going to a Calvary chapel and they got a rock band there, and the preacher gives good sermons, and they're short, and there's lots of activities and stuff going on for the youth. But you get people who are raised Catholic, and unless you're going to the Newman Center or something at the U of O, it can be kind of drudgery, and so people kind of fall away from it. And then they come back to it later after they have kids and force their kids to go, which they hated when they were kids. And I always think, why do they do that? Well, it seems sort of like the Stockholm syndrome. You feel like it's a part of your identity. Even though you hated it as a kid, as an adult, you think, well, man, it was good for me. And I think people have that similar idea. There's this sort of, I don't know, it's something weird psychologically going on. It's the same, I think it's a similar way in which women who are raised with emotionally distant, angry, alcoholic fathers often end up with angry, violent, alcoholic boyfriends and husbands. And it's a similar sort of thing. You're raised in a certain environment, and even though in a lot of ways you are reacting against it and loathe and despise it, there's also this sort of strange sense of attraction and comfort because it's something that was around you all the time growing up. And I think people feel the same way about religion, whatever it is. And Islam is so much a part of daily life and so permeates every culture that it's in. If there's a majority, then it's always there, and so it's tough to break away from.
Hard not to use brainwashing when you're talking about
it. It does kind of seem like brainwashing is kind of an intentional thing you're doing, like a targeted way. Sometimes, though, like religion is sort of part of the culture. You just kind of absorb it. It's not like people are intentionally trying to get people to accept it. It's just that everybody believes it, and you grow up around everybody believing it, and it sort of sinks into the bottom of your subconscious mind, and it's really hard to dislodge it. That's why, I don't know, I pick on the Catholics all the time. I knew someone who was Catholic, and they went to Catholic school when they were really big on the hell and the guilt a lot more than today. And they said, yeah, I remember the priest used to take me into the closet. I'm like, oh boy, here it comes. I'm like, no, and he would beat me. He would beat me up, like with his fists. And then I'm like, God, that's horrible. I thought you would say you're molested you, but that's like even worse. And he's like, yeah, but I was a bad kid. I deserved it. And this guy, he's in his late 40s, and he's talking about being beat up by a priest because he was like not paying attention or something in class. He's like, yeah, I was a bad kid. I deserved it. And it's still in there, that sort of idea. And the guy's an atheist. But he's still the sort of idea of original sin. I'm a bad person. I should feel guilty. I had another friend that was like, said, they can't look at themselves naked in the mirror. They feel ashamed and guilty. Why? Because, well, they're told that sex was dirty and their body was dirty, and the original sin was sex, and there's told when they're like so high, like 8 years old or something like that, in Catholic school, and it just sort of sunk in. So people get complexes from all kinds of things, but especially I think religion. Yeah.
I noticed that with the Muslim girl that I interviewed, she had like a lot of internal conflicts. Because she lives in a total college atmosphere. She's out of town from the very first time, and like she just talks a lot about it's like a constant internal struggle. Mm-hmm. But she so badly just wants to be like viewed as like normal and have this normal experience, but like she can't get over the like internalized like guilty, and you have to just how the women are in.
Right, the extreme modesty and the wearing the head covering and all that stuff, and you kind of stand out like a sore thumb if you're wearing like a scarf or a hijab or something like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of like there's this kind of two desires. One is to fit in with all the people around you, and the other is to be true to the traditions of your parents and your culture and so on. And so it's really hard for people to immigrate to sort of adjust. It seems like there was something else I wanted to say about that. The internalized attitudes, shame and guilt, sex. What else? Let's move on. There's a whole can of worms there I could open up there, but I won't. Cartoons. Could a cartoon cause people to riot? I was looking I used to have these up on my, I wonder if I could find that up here. Well, let me just see if I can.
I know what you're talking.
I had there we go. I wonder if this is big enough. Here's the one that really got people upset. So here's Muhammad, and he's wearing a turban, and his turban is a bomb, right? So, and this is sending a message about Islam and terrorism. People who saw this said, how dare people associate Islam with religious violence, and proceed to riot and break things and hurt people because they were so outraged that anyone would associate Islam with religious violence. This is in Denmark that this happened.
So they caused violence because they were outraged that religion would be depicted as violent?
Right.
I thought the outrage was because it was even a depiction of Muhammad.
Well, I mean, there is this prohibition against depicting Muhammad, but it was also Muhammad with like his turban as a bomb.
Yeah.
People, they're also reacting just to that as well. So here's, let's see if, I like this one. Stop, we ran out of virgins. So here are all the suicide bombers coming into, paradise, and there's the guy at the gate saying, sorry, we're out of virgins, right? Because the idea is the suicide bombers are promised, virgins in heaven. Some of these are like, there's a Danish, this one looks amusing. Oh, so here's a Dutch cartoonist here. And one of the Dutch cartoonists actually apologized and said it was a bad idea. So I guess this he's drawing a picture of Muhammad Ali, like the boxer. and here's some guy that's going to cut off his head without realizing that. Let's see. Oops. I had all these, the ones that caused the riots sort of laid out here. See if I can find the originals. This one's got all of them, but it's kind of small. I like, And let's see if this will work. Too small.
So you can right click on it and go to view image, and then you can maybe make it.
I could try to blow it up a little bit, but it's just really,
like
that one's it's a composite, so it's really small. Let me see if I can find there's one where I might end up blowing it up. You never know what you're going to get in Google Images. And some of these, you look at them, you don't get it because it's Dutch. I mean, here's one of them right here. So this is just, kind of innocuous, really. The crescent moon, although it's a depiction of Muhammad, I suppose. There's another one that shows, I'll see if I can call up the one I want on the break. It shows, it's this one here. Let's try that. Yeah, really small. Can't really see this. There's a guy, and basically it shows two women wearing the hijab with only their eyes showing, and then they've got it's like a black slash through his eyes. And it's sort of what they do for, like in the porno mags for obscenity. They'll put like black slashes through people's faces so you can't see their faces. And the idea is, what's a real obscenity? Is it women's bodies, or is it some religious fanatic killing people in the name of his God? That was sort of the point here. A lot of these things, these cartoons, though, there's a few, like we ran out of virgins and a few things, but a lot of them were kind of tame. It wasn't like I think of some of the stuff you see coming out of the U of O with their student newspapers or something, or I think about people do a lot of outrageous transgressive art against Christianity, and what happens? A bunch of old women show up with rosary beads in front of the theater. There was a play called Corpus Christi that portrays Jesus as king of the queers, and he's basically has orgies with his disciples and is gay. Jesus is gay. Jesus is a flamboyant gay man. And so what happens? Well, some religious people show up outside the theater and wave signs around. So you never get any riots, or pretty rarely that you get violence against people that just stick their thumb in the eye of Christianity. But in Islamic countries, there was one case in Nigeria where there was a beauty pageant, and they decided to have it. And I believe this is in Nigeria, and there was a Christian newspaper, not like Christian in the sense of like the Christian Science Monitor, not like a church newsletter or something, but this was like a paper nominally Christian. And one of the things it said was that the contestants were beautiful. Any one of them would have been fit as a wife for Muhammad. And people read that, and there was spread, and there was riots, and people tried to burn down the newspaper, and they went into the Christian neighborhoods and burned down people's houses, and people were killed. And just strong reaction. Why? Because going back to the time of Muhammad didn't put up with being disrespected, and respect for Muhammad was was enforced through the church-state empire. And so in most Muslim countries, blasphemy is a crime. It's disrespecting Islam is a crime. So here, there's a passage about this happened in Istanbul. So, and he just Spencer's just talking about these the case of the Dutch authorities and how there's not Dutch. I'm trying to read this. Here Spencer just is talking about these Danish newspaper cartoons, and there were riots worldwide over these cartoons, and he mentions a couple of places in Gaza and Tunis, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and then. Now, Bill Clinton's actually attacking the cartoonists, so, not supporting freedom of speech, but taking the side of the rioters. And then the guilty Dutch are already bending backwards to apologize for the cartoons also, as being religiously insensitive. Let's see. So that's just a case in point of some cartoons come out in a Danish newspaper and there's riots worldwide over disrespect for Islam, but other religions get made fun of routinely, and you don't see mass riots in the street, which I think again shows that Islam is different than say Hinduism or Christianity or Buddhism, in that you have different attitudes about the idea of blaspheming the religion. With Christianity, you're supposed to love your enemies, and if someone says something bad about Jesus, you're supposed to forgive them, right? And the same thing with Buddhism, you're just supposed to not let it bother you. And you look at the relationship between church and state in Christianity versus and Buddhism and Hinduism compared with Islam. And in Islam, church and state are one, and so of course you can use the state to suppress speech, to make blasphemy a crime, and also go after people in other countries where Muslims aren't a majority, to try to pressure them to not blaspheme or profit. So this other thing happened. So this is the cartoon rage in Istanbul, and then Pope rage in Istanbul. Actually, this is just cartoon rage, I guess, and versus freedom of speech. So I'm conflated the two stories. Sorry about that. The riots were worldwide. This particular the riots about the Pope were in Istanbul, Turkey, formerly Constantinople, head of the Eastern Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. And so what happened was Pope Benedict, the last pope, gave a speech, and he was quoting some other guy, and I believe a previous pope. Let me find the quote here that outraged people. Oh, here it is. So it's so the Pope gave this speech, I think, in Germany. I think that's where University of Regensburg is. He's quoting Byzantine Emperor Paleologos. And so what he says, so the quote is, "Show me what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find things only evil and unhuman, such as the command to spread by the sword the faith he preached." And then because of those remarks, what were there? Well, there's religious violence everywhere. Now, that probably wasn't a good idea to say, right, in a public speech. If you're the Pope, you gotta watch what you say. You're gonna upset people. But still, it's that set off again riots worldwide, and particularly in Istanbul, where the Pope was going to give a speech, and people were really nervous about his security and safety because people occasionally try to assassinate the Pope, and it was thought that that might happen there if he visited Istanbul. And then what Spencer points out is that people are outraged over the Pope's comments, but they forget the fact that in Turkey, a nominally secular country, after the revolution in the early teens by the Young Turks, and Ataturk, and you had Turkey go secular. Still, even in secular Turkey, Christian churches Christians are treated as second-class citizens. Christian churches can't expand. They can't build new churches, and in many ways, are treated less than. And this sort of pattern of discrimination is led from the Christian population going from Constantinople was 50% Christian in 1914. and today less than 1%. Now, a lot of those Christians were Armenians that were slaughtered by the Young Turks. So, but still, over time, people get tired of being discriminated against and they convert. Catholic Church has no legal recognition. Catholic churches, like other churches, remain inconspicuous, have to remain inconspicuous so as not as to draw the attention of the mujahideen. So you can't operate a seminary, can't build a new house of worship. And these are all built into Sharia, which is a codification of the commandments in the Quran and the Hadith. It's similar to the Jewish law found in the Talmud, the oral traditions later written down. So the Sharia is a codification of the Quran and the Hadith and the teachings of early Muslim leaders, all sort of put together as a comprehensive law code. And one of the things it says is you can't, Christians and Jews can't make new houses of worship. They can't expand the old ones. And the idea is to keep a lid on these religions. Yes, you can keep on practicing your religion, but you're going to have all these restrictions. And the idea is that over time, people are going to convert. Comments or questions?
When did Sharia come out?
Like the 8th century, is finished about the 8th century AD. Robert Spencer runs a website called Jihad Watch. Oh, that's his book is Islam Unveiled. That's the one I was trying to remember. And the Politically Correct Guide to Islam and the Crusades. Politically incorrect, sorry. You look at a couple of the things in the book from Hassan al-Banna. So you go to the section on al-Ghazali. The al-Ghazali stuff, basically what I need you to remember about al-Ghazali is he's a mystic, he's a Sufi Muslim, and he's the guy that made Sufism respectable in Islam. And he said you had to obey the outer commandments and also the inward commandments. So all the stuff that Muslims do, the 5 pillars, al-Ghazali said, got to keep on doing that, but also you can try to have this vision of seeing God's face and experiencing God's love and so on. So he kind of combined outward and inward observance and made Sufism respectable. There's the stuff from Rumi here. Rumi's the guy that started the Whirling Dervishes. So I included some speeches from Osama bin Laden, now dead, and also from, we had some stuff from Hassan al-Banna in here too. I think I've got an older edition. Let's see, and from the Hamas Charter, I believe. Let's see. Is there somebody with the latest edition who isn't sick that wants to lend me their book? You're not still contagious, are you? You're hacking the whole time. I'll wash my hands later. Okay. I was so paranoid about getting sick.
If you ate meat, you wouldn't be as susceptible.
I don't think so.
Need those good cattle antibodies from the injections,
I don't know if those the antibiotics. You have antibiotics going through your system. That only helps with the bacteria, though, not the virus. I think they're different antibiotics. I don't know if there's such small quantities too. I don't know. I'm not really worried about eating meat like the antibiotics. I'm more worried about like the saturated fat and the protein, the effect of excess protein on the body, and the extra calories. All right, here we go. Oh, Hassan al-Banna. So Hassan al-Banna founded the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Brotherhood is this big worldwide Islamic organization. It's spawned the Muslim student associations that you have on many American campuses, including at the University of Oregon. It spawned Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. And it was a foundation for groups, like Al-Qaeda. It's the theological, part of the theological basis for Al-Qaeda. So if you look at Hassan al-Banna and you read his work, he's basically just quoting from the Quran and interpreting it, but it's not like he says, okay, here's a Quranic passage and then quotes it, and then he says, but it really means this. No, he says, here's a passage, I think it speaks for itself, and here's another passage, see what I mean? And he's just like quoting the Quran and the Hadith. So talking about jihad as the religious duty of every Muslim, and he actually makes a lot of the same arguments I've made in class here. So I find myself in agreement with Hassan al-Banna on many issues of interpreting what the Quran says. Now, whether one should do it or not is a different question. But as far as what the Quran actually teaches, I'll just read this little passage here. God has imposed jihad as a religious duty on every Muslim, categorically and rigorously, from which there is neither evasion nor escape. He has rendered it the supreme object of desire and made it the reward of martyrs and fighters, in his way a splendid one, for he has conjoined with them in their reward only those who acted as they did and modeled themselves upon their performance of jihad. Let's see. He threatened backsliders and slackers with his most frightful punishments and qualified them by the most repellent epithets and invectives. He reproached them for their cowardice and lack of spirit and castigated them for their weakness and truancy. In this world, he has prepared for them the disgrace which will not be lifted until they take part in jihad. And in the next, a chastisement they shall not escape, though they possess the equal of Mount Hood in gold. He regards abstention and evasion of jihad as one of the major sins and one of the 7 moral sins that guarantee annihilation. It's page 188 on jihad. And then he just quotes a bunch of verses in the Quran to support his case. And I think the rest of this sort of speaks for itself. So what, politically, again, Islam's a very political religion. It has political prescriptions. What does Hassan al-Banna say about that? So he sees these as part of reforming Islam. So Hassan al-Banna is part of the modern fundamentalist Islamic movement. Him along with, probably only second to al-Wahhab, is the founder of the Wahhabis. The two of them probably more responsible for the resurgence of fundamentalism in the 20th century than any other person. So he wants, an end to rivalry of the different Islamic factions, amending the law such that it conforms to all branches of Islamic legislation. There's like a handful of fundamentalists in America that want to make the Bible the law of the land. Of course, nobody's talking about stoning to death adulterers, right? This guy wants to stone adulterers to death, right? Because that's in the Quran. Most American Christians have given up on that. There might be a few nuts out there, but this is part of political Islam. Reinforcing the armed forces, increasing the number of youth groups, igniting in them the spirit of Islamic jihad, strengthening ties between Islamic countries, especially Arab countries, paving the way for the practical and serious consideration concerning the departed caliphate. So the caliphate It's talking about the empire of the Caliph or the deputy of Muhammad. It's the idea of a worldwide Islamic empire. And that's the goal of all fundamentalist Muslims, is a worldwide Islamic empire where currently the Muslims, and again, talking about the fundamentalist Muslims, divide the world into two parts. There's the House of Islam and there's the House of War. It's called the House of War because they're the infidels you're warring against until they submit. Once they submit, once all the infidels have submit, then you have a worldwide Islamic empire, all under Allah. So that's the goal he's talking about. Spreading Islamic spirit throughout all departments of the government. Hassan al-Banna is writing in Egypt, and I think, when was this written? I think most of the stuff that he wrote was like maybe in the 20s, 30s. No, actually, no, in the 30s and 40s, I believe. He lived from 1906 to 1949. Founded the Muslim Brotherhood in 28. So he's writing in the 30s and 40s, and he's an Egyptian. And so what does he want? He wants to infiltrate the government with fundamentalist Muslims who will legislate Islam as law in Egypt. And you see that to a large degree in Egypt too. That although Musharraf's a dictator and kept a lid on fundamentalism, there was a very strong Islamic influence in the country. Even stronger now, post Mubarak. Okay, ending bribery and nepotism. So it's not all bad, right? Talk about national holidays in honor of Islam. Social and educational goals. Conditioning the people to respect public morality and issue law-bound directives on this matter. The imposition of severe penalties for moral offenses. And this is what happens in fundamentalist Islamic countries. If you're caught committing adultery, if you're married, you're going to be stoned to death. If you're unmarried, you're going to be flogged publicly. And not just given a few lashes. You're going to be whipped bloody so you have lifelong scars and may even die from infection or bleeding. To deal with the woman issue in a way which will both elevate her position and provide for her protection in accordance with Islamic teachings. And so what does that mean? Well, it basically means how do you elevate women? Well, you protect their virtue, which means keeping them barefoot and pregnant at home, and having all kinds of laws against things like prostitution, flogging. So what happens in America if you visit a prostitute? If you're caught with a prostitute, well, you go to jail and you pay a fine, maybe. Or you're embarrassed on national TV and some, on cops or something like that, right? But you get flogged in the Islamic country. An end to gambling in all its form, games, lotteries, racings, and casinos. A campaign against drinking, similar to the ones against drug. So prohibition in Islamic countries. And this is all, again, Hassan al-Banna, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the attitudes of fundamentalist Muslims, it's like ban all vices, use the government to ban all these things and make people act morally. Yeah.
Do they have any ties to smuggling drugs or crime of that sort? I was under the perception that, they had illegal dealings as well, or is it just...
Not that I'm aware of. You might be thinking about the Taliban. So some of these terrorist groups, in order to be financed, will do things like deal in opium, say, or heroin. And it's like a way to finance a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood isn't itself... it's not itself like an operational terrorist organization. It's more of a worldwide fundamentalist association, but it does have lots of terrorist ties to other organizations, which are terrorists. I'd say Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they're a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. doesn't mean the whole Muslim Brotherhood are terrorists. It's just that some Muslim Brotherhood branches are more involved in religious violence than others, I guess. But I think that Hassan al-Banna would probably be really against this idea of selling heroin in order to finance jihad fighters. I think he would disagree with that. Campaign against ostentation in dress and loose behavior. The instruction of women in what is proper, with particular strictness as regards female teachers, pupils, physicians, and students in those similar categories. The prohibition of free mixing between male and female students. So you have sex-segregated schools. And to consider privacy between a marriageable man and a woman as a punishable crime. So, and you get this in some fundamentalist countries too, like just being alone or just sitting at a cafe table with a person that's not your sister or your mother, like a woman that you're not related to, is a crime. And you could be hauled off to jail, you might be flogged. The encouragement of marriage and procreation, the closure of morally undesirable ballrooms and dance halls. So again, this is written in the 20s, but you see this strong moralistic strain. And the idea is sort of back to basics. And back to basics for Islam means a strong, puritanical law code that says don't do this, don't do that, and particularly restrictions on women and sexuality and anything associated with those two things. And forcing people to obey religious edicts through the government. And then not to be forgotten, lots of economic strictures too. So the Muslim Brotherhood, besides being theocrats and wanting to force a religion on everybody, also are a bunch of socialists too. So they want prohibition of usury. Usury is a charge of interest. And that's one of the reasons why Islam got left behind and didn't have a Renaissance. Basically, what caused the Renaissance? Free trade and banking. What did you see in Italy? You saw a bunch of Jews running banks, and you saw people financing trade operations. And once you have capital, and once you can finance overseas trade, and you get a little globalization going on there, pretty soon the arts and the humanities and political liberty, everything sort of takes off, and you get a lot of stuff going on. And science and art and literature, and it all started in Italy, in the 15th century, and sort of spread to the rest of Europe. And a lot of it had to do with financing trade operations. In the Middle East, can't charge anybody interest on a loan, so there's no motivation to risk your capital, right, if you're not getting any return on your investment. So, and that's part of the Islamic law code. Now that's part of Judaism too, but the idea is you can't charge interest to your fellow Jews, but you can charge the Gentile. So since Jews are the minority and Gentiles are the ones often borrowing the money, and of course, if you're a Jew, you can borrow money from a Gentile who's borrowed it from another Jew, right? So there's like ways around these rules too, even for Jewish merchants. But anyway, the prohibition against lending money at interest is one reason why Islamic countries still have a foot in the Middle Ages. And not everything in here is bad. There's stuff about child labor in the Communist Manifesto that I don't necessarily have a big quibble with. Although I think that I think it's good for kids to work, but having them work in factories where their arms get mangled when they're supposed to fix the equipment, that's probably not a good idea, right? So I can see having some rules against child labor, but it's right there in the Communist Manifesto. So in the same way here, there's some things that might be worthwhile, but a lot of stuff that's I think will strike you as being kind of medieval and anti-modern, and it's the big sort of pushback against modernization and the back to basics movement in fundamentalist Islam that's driving a lot of the radical ideology. And then I also included a section from the Hamas charter here. Hamas stands for the Islamic Resistance Movement. And just a little bit from here. I'm looking for where's the passage that says jihad is our way, and I'm trying to find, there's like one particular passage that's quoted often. I thought it was at the beginning here. Let's see if I can find it after the break. So, well, after the break, we'll review for the exam and the final exam, and this will be our last class. Let's take 10.
Check it out.
Awesome.